welcome to my PI project presentation. My name is Caitlin Witz. The topic of my presentation is waste reduction and improved waste documentation in select patient line foods. So what I observed. While determining what I wanted to do for my project, the most alarming thing that I noticed was the amount of waste in my facility. I was asked to shadow different food service workers my first couple weeks there, and they have their patient line as it's in a hospital, they have a cafeteria, and they also have catering, and I noticed waste everywhere. I also noticed that waste documentation isn't always practiced. There was one day where I was working with people in catering and they were throwing out tubs and tubs of cold salads, and they weren't even keeping track of these numbers. They were just tossing them in the garbage and that was it. Another thing that I took note of is the fact that looking at waste at a large scale is extremely difficult. In hospitals, there's so much going on with their cafeteria, with their patient line. It's very hard to keep track of all of this waste. So as I said before, waste documentation is something that isn't always practiced. Although the workers are given waste logs, they're not always filled out. Also, cooks are given production sheets to fill out, so at the end of each meal service, they're supposed to keep track of what is being thrown out, and the accuracy of this is questionable. Sometimes they make more than they're supposed to, and then they try to make up for it by showing that there isn't as much waste as there really is. So this number is not always accurate. So my focus, I tried to look at waste throughout the entire hot station, which is part of the patient line, and I became completely overwhelmed. There were so many different food items. It was really difficult for me to do. So I narrowed it down and just focused on the pre-portioned purees, which are entrees and vegetables, and this was easier for me to do just because they're, in individual portions and they're easy to keep track of. Just to have like a basic number of how many are being thrown out was a lot easier than trying to do it from something that was coming from a pan and trying to say a quarter of a pan, a third of a pan. So this just kind of helped with accuracy. And I kept track of these numbers and looked at what was being thrown out at the end of lunch and dinner service, since this is when these purees are being served. And during my 3-week observation, I found that there was an average of 8 pureed entrees being thrown out after each meal service and 6 pureed vegetables. So just to look at the cost of this, pureed entrees are quite expensive. They're 82 cents a portion. So with 8 being thrown out on average, this would be a loss of $4,788 a year. And vegetables are cheaper. They're 59 cents a portion. So with 6 being thrown out on average, this is a loss of $2,584 a year. So this number totals $7,372 that is just being tossed in the garbage. So my intervention. So in an attempt to save some money and cut back on food waste, I asked the cooks to cut back on the amount of pureed entrees that they were preparing by 5 at each meal service. And then I asked the cooks and select food service workers to document the amount of purees being thrown out after the meal service, which is what I had been doing for 3 weeks. So now I was putting it in their hands. This was part of my in-service. I gave them a sheet with the numbers that I had just discussed and just told them I was trying to cut back on these numbers and asked for their help in doing this. So this was the waste log that I gave them. This showed the pureed entrees, the vegetables, and I also just had an other spot for other foods that were just, if they were being thrown out at an alarming number, just to keep track of that, and also hamburgers because that was something my preceptor wanted me to look at on the side. So my results. After collecting data for several weeks, or having the cooks and food service workers collect the data, I averaged the number again of pureed vegetables and entrees that were being documented, and I did go back every once, during my time there and just make sure that they were doing this accurately, just because I wanted to make sure that my numbers were correct. So the average that I found at this point was 4 pureed entrees and 3 pureed vegetables that were being thrown out. So this number is cut in half compared to the averages that I had documented in the first 3 weeks of beginning my project. Also, just on a side note, this number does take a 0 into consideration if more purees needed to be made, because that was something that I ran into where they ran out at meal service and had to make more. But on the bright side, these days there was nothing being wasted. If this pattern continued, this would save $2,394 in entrees and $1,292 in pureed vegetables. So this number totals $3,686 that would be saved compared to what the number was before. So there is an opportunity to reduce this number if waste was eliminated in this area, which I know is a little bit far-fetched to think, but there is still room for improvement. So these are just a couple barriers that I had. Sorry. The first thing, as I said before, when I first started this project, the first day that I did my intervention, they ran out. So that was kind of embarrassing. But, as I said before, at least there's nothing being wasted these days. So running out did happen a couple times, which didn't happen as much. Also, the census is just kind of a bit of a barrier. It doesn't affect this too much because there is a skilled nursing floor, and this is where most of the pureed foods are going to, but every once in a while there would be another patient that needed these, so this wouldn't be taken into consideration. Also, one problem that I had was just my facility was short-staffed a lot of the time, and when this happened, there were staff coming into the positions that were supposed to help me with my project, the cooks, the food service workers, and these people weren't told about my project or weren't given an in-service because they weren't typically in this position, so that was a little bit of a problem. Also, compliance. Most people were pretty compliant in my project, but a lot of people are resistant to change, so this was something that just kind of caused a little bit of a problem, but not too bad. So my recommendations. I recommended to my facility that they continue to monitor waste. These numbers that I had found, were cut in half, so there is potential to make small changes to save money and cut back on waste. Also, a computerized system. Comp nutrition is something that my facility is looking at, but it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it is something that is really supposed to help cut back on waste, because the patient service assistants, who are the ones that go up to the patient's floors and collect menus, with this program, they just go up and do everything from an iPad or a computer, so it just gets sent down to the kitchen, so things are prepared right then. So this would be huge if my facility would get this, and they're really trying to work on it, but it costs a lot of money. So I also recommended charting for my facility. I'm not sure if anyone else was in a hospital and came across this, but charting was something that the PSAs did to certain food items that weren't always served, and they would tally these numbers up from their menus and then give them to one of the food service workers, and they would prepare these items from this direct number. So I think this is something with the purees, when they're given the menus, these could be charted as well and tallied, and then this would really cut back on the waste. And I also recommended that supervisors or managers do audits to check the food service workers' charting accuracy and waste documentation accuracy, because I think this is something that some workers are a little bit nervous because they don't want to run out of food during meal service, or they don't want to show that they made too much. So I think that it's important that these numbers are looked at from a supervisor. So these are all my recommendations to my facility, and they are going to implement some of them. Hopefully, they had talked about it during my presentation to them. So I really hope that I did make a difference and helped them cut back on their costs. And that's it. Thanks for watching.